The Improbable Ape, A Journey Through the Astronomical Odds of Human Existence, by Rob Corley. Written and produced by Rob Corley. The Biological Tightrope. Protected by our cosmic shields, life had a chance to begin. But beginning was just the first impossibility. What came next was even more improbable. Picture life as a tightrope walker, balanced precariously over an abyss of extinction. Every step forward is a risk. Every innovation is a gamble. Fall to one side, and you become too specialized to adapt. Fall to the other, and you remain too simple to compete. The path to complexity is narrow, treacherous, and littered with the bones of species that took one wrong step. For nearly 4 billion years, life has been walking this tightrope, making one improbable leap after another. Each major evolutionary innovation was both a triumph and a near disaster, a solution to one problem that created a dozen new ones. The story of life is not a steady march toward complexity. It's a desperate dance on the edge of oblivion, where survival depends on a series of biological miracles so unlikely they approach the impossible. Let's follow that dance, step by precarious step, from the first self-replicating molecules to the emergence of consciousness itself. The first miracle, something from nothing. In the beginning, there was chemistry. On the early Earth, amid volcanic fury and a turbulent atmosphere, a dance of atoms gave rise to something unprecedented, molecules that could copy themselves. This wasn't a divine spark, it was a molecular lottery, a statistical improbability that somehow, against all odds, paid out. The emergence of life from non-life, abiogenesis, remains one of science's grandest unsolved puzzles. We know it happened because we're here, but how it happened is still largely a mystery, wrapped in competing theories and tantalizing clues. The classic story begins with the primordial soup, a rich broth of organic compounds in Earth's early oceans. The famous Miller-Urey experiment in 1953 showed that amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, could form spontaneously under early Earth conditions. Lightning, ultraviolet radiation, and volcanic activity provided the energy to forge complex molecules from simple ingredients. But there's a problem with the soup theory. It's too dilute. The concentrations of organic molecules in the open ocean would have been far too low for the complex chemistry of life to get started. It's like trying to bake a cake by throwing flour, eggs, and sugar into a swimming pool and hoping they'll somehow find each other. Enter the hydrothermal vents, those underwater geysers where superheated, mineral-rich water erupts from the sea floor. These geological features provide everything the soup theory lacks: concentrated chemicals, abundant energy, and protected microenvironments. The intricate, porous structures of these vents could have acted as natural laboratories, concentrating organic molecules and facilitating the reactions that led to life. Recent research has focused on alkaline hydrothermal vents, like those at Lost City in the Atlantic Ocean. These vents create natural pH gradients and electrical fields that could have driven the first metabolic reactions. It's a metabolism-first model that suggests life began not with self-replicating molecules, but with self-sustaining chemical reactions, a kind of proto-metabolism that gradually evolved the ability to reproduce itself. Within this chemical chaos, RNA may have been the first molecule to bridge the gap between information and action. The RNA world hypothesis suggests that these versatile molecules, capable of both storing genetic information and catalyzing chemical reactions, were the precursors to all life. They were the first replicators, fragile and rudimentary, but capable of the fundamental trick that defines life: making copies of themselves. But here's the thing about those first replicators. They immediately began changing their environment. They consumed resources, produced waste, and altered the chemistry of their tiny pools. Success bred competition, which demanded innovation, which created new environmental pressures. From the very beginning, life was not just adapting to its environment, it was actively reshaping it, setting up the feedback loops that would drive evolution for the next 4 billion years. The oxygen catastrophe, Life's first existential crisis. Life's next trick was audacious, harvesting sunlight. Around 3.5 billion years ago, cyanobacteria evolved photosynthesis, the ability to split water molecules and use the energy from sunlight to build organic compounds. It was a biochemical revolution that transformed Earth's chemistry and its destiny. But photosynthesis came with a deadly byproduct, oxygen. To most life forms at the time, oxygen was a poison, a highly reactive molecule capable of tearing apart the delicate organic structures that early life depended on. The Great Oxidation Event, which occurred around 2.4 billion years ago, was not a gentle greening of the planet, but a slow, suffocating catastrophe. Imagine the scale of this disaster. For over 1 billion years, life had evolved in an oxygen-free world. Suddenly, the atmosphere was filling with a toxic gas that could destroy cellular machinery and disrupt metabolic processes. It was the first mass extinction, triggered not by an asteroid or volcanic eruption, but by life itself. Most anaerobic organisms died out, unable to cope with the new chemical reality. But some life forms found a way to turn poison into power. They evolved aerobic respiration, the ability to use oxygen to extract energy from organic molecules with unprecedented efficiency. This innovation unlocked a new level of metabolic power, providing the energy needed for larger, more complex life forms. The oxygen catastrophe illustrates a fundamental truth about evolution. Every major innovation creates new opportunities and new dangers. Photosynthesis solved the problem of energy scarcity, but created the problem of oxygen toxicity. Aerobic respiration solved the oxygen problem, but created new vulnerabilities to oxidative stress. Life doesn't just adapt to its environment, it constantly reshapes that environment in ways that create new evolutionary pressures. The Great Merger, when cells became cities. The next impossibility was even more improbable: the fusion of two radically different cells into a single, more complex organism. Around 2 billion years ago, one cell engulfed another, not to digest it, but to collaborate with it. The engulfed cell became the mitochondrion, the powerhouse of the cell, while the host became the first eukaryote, the ancestor of all complex life. This event, endosymbiosis, was so unlikely that it may have happened only once in Earth's history. Think about what had to go right. The host cell had to be large enough to engulf the bacterium without destroying it. The bacterium had to survive inside the host without being digested. Both cells had to benefit from the arrangement enough to make the partnership permanent. And somehow, over millions of years, the two genomes had to integrate, with the bacterium transferring most of its genes to the host nucleus, while retaining just enough to function. The result was revolutionary. Eukaryotic cells could generate far more energy than their prokaryotic predecessors, thanks to their mitochondrial powerhouses. This energy surplus made possible the evolution of larger, more complex cells with specialized internal structures. It was the foundation for everything that followed: multicellular organisms, sexual reproduction, complex ecosystems, and eventually, consciousness itself. But the merger also created new vulnerabilities. Eukaryotic cells became dependent on their mitochondria for survival. Any disruption to this ancient partnership, through disease, genetic mutation, or environmental stress, could be catastrophic. The very complexity that made eukaryotes successful also made them fragile, a theme that would repeat throughout the history of life. The invention of death, sex and the mortal coil. With eukaryotes came another revolutionary innovation: sex. Instead of simply cloning themselves, organisms began shuffling genes between two parents, creating offspring that were genetically unique. It was a risky strategy that came with significant costs. The famous twofold cost of sex means that sexual populations grow at half the rate of asexual ones. So why did sex evolve? The answer lies in the Red Queen hypothesis, named after the character in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, who had to keep running just to stay in the same place. In a world full of parasites and pathogens, genetic diversity is a survival strategy. By constantly shuffling genes, sexual reproduction ensures that at least some offspring will be resistant to whatever diseases are currently circulating. But sex came with an unexpected consequence: death. Asexual organisms can theoretically live forever, simply dividing and regenerating indefinitely. Sexual organisms, however, age and die, their bodies wearing out as the cellular machinery accumulates damage over time. Sex and death are intimately linked. The price of genetic diversity is individual mortality. This trade-off between individual survival and species adaptation would become a recurring theme in evolution. Time and again, life would sacrifice the interests of individuals for the long-term survival of the species. It's a cruel calculus, but one that has allowed life to persist through countless environmental changes and catastrophes. The Cambrian explosion, life's Big Bang. For 3 billion years, life remained mostly microscopic and simple. Then, around 541 million years ago, something extraordinary happened. In a geological instant, a mere 20 million years, life exploded into complexity. The Cambrian explosion saw the emergence of most modern animal body plans, a burst of evolutionary creativity that has never been matched. What triggered this biological Big Bang? Several factors likely converged. Rising oxygen levels provided the energy needed for larger, more active organisms. The evolution of predation created an evolutionary arms race that drove rapid innovation. The development of Hox genes, master control genes that determine body plan, provided the genetic toolkit for building complex body structures. But perhaps most importantly, the evolution of vision transformed the game entirely. Eyes allowed organisms to detect predators and prey from a distance, fundamentally changing the dynamics of survival. Suddenly, camouflage, speed, armor, and weapons became crucial for survival. The Cambrian seas became an evolutionary battlefield where innovation was the only path to survival. The Cambrian explosion created the basic template for complex life that persists today. But it also established the pattern of boom and bust that would characterize the rest of evolutionary history. Periods of rapid innovation would be followed by mass extinctions, each one reshuffling the deck and creating new opportunities for the survivors. The terrestrial gamble: life leaves the water. Life's next great gamble was leaving the safety of the oceans for the hostile environment of land. Around 470 million years ago, the first plants began colonizing the terrestrial environment, followed eventually by animals. It was a risky move. Land was a desert compared to the nutrient-rich seas, with extreme temperature variations, intense ultraviolet radiation, and no water to support body weight. But the rewards were enormous. Land offered vast new territories to colonize, abundant sunlight for photosynthesis, and freedom from marine predators. The first terrestrial colonizers, simple plants like mosses and liverworts, began the slow process of transforming the landscape, creating soil, moderating climate, and establishing the foundation for terrestrial ecosystems. The transition to land required numerous innovations: waterproof surfaces to prevent desiccation, structural support to resist gravity, new reproductive strategies that didn't depend on water, and eventually, lungs and limbs for animals. Each innovation opened new possibilities, but also created new vulnerabilities. The colonization of land also triggered one of the most dramatic environmental changes in Earth's history. As plants spread across the continents, they began pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis and weathering of rocks. This led to a dramatic cooling that may have triggered the late Ordovician Ice Age, one of the most severe in Earth's history. Once again, life's success in one domain created catastrophic changes in another. The human experiment: consciousness awakens. The most recent and perhaps most improbable innovation in the history of life is the emergence of human consciousness. Somewhere in the last few million years, a lineage of African apes developed brains capable of abstract thought, language, and self-awareness. It was an evolutionary experiment with no precedent and uncertain outcomes. The human brain is an energy-hungry organ, consuming about 20% of our total metabolic budget, despite representing only 2% of our body weight. This massive energy investment had to be justified by equally massive survival advantages. Those advantages came in the form of tool use, language, cooperation, and the ability to manipulate the environment on an unprecedented scale. But human consciousness also created entirely new categories of problems. We became capable of anxiety about the future, regret about the past, and existential dread about our own mortality. We developed the ability to imagine scenarios that might never happen, and to worry about problems that might never arise. In many ways, consciousness is as much a burden as a gift. More importantly, human consciousness has given life the ability to understand and potentially control its own evolution. For the first time in Earth's history, a species has become aware of the evolutionary process and capable of directing it. We can now manipulate genes, create new organisms, and potentially spread life to other worlds. We have become evolution's first conscious participants. The tightrope continues. Each of these evolutionary innovations, self-replication, photosynthesis, eukaryogenesis, sex, multicellularity, terrestrial colonization, consciousness, was improbable in its own right. Together, they represent a chain of biological miracles so unlikely that they approach the impossible. But here's the thing about walking a tightrope. You can't stop moving. Evolution never reaches a stable endpoint where the risks disappear. Every solution creates new problems. Every adaptation opens new vulnerabilities. Life must keep innovating, keep taking risks, keep walking the narrow line between extinction and complexity. We are the latest walkers on this ancient tightrope, balanced precariously between our animal past and an uncertain future. Our consciousness gives us the ability to see the abyss below and the path ahead, but it doesn't make the walking any easier. If anything, awareness of our precarious position makes the journey more terrifying, but it also makes it more meaningful. We are not just the products of 4 billion years of biological innovation. We are its inheritors and its guardians. The tightrope that brought us into existence now depends on us to keep walking, to keep innovating, to keep finding ways to survive in a universe that remains fundamentally hostile to life. The biological tightrope that led to our existence was just the beginning. The same planet that nurtured life's emergence also became the stage for catastrophes that repeatedly brought the entire experiment to the brink of failure. Our ancestors didn't just have to evolve, they had to survive apocalypses that would have ended the story before it truly began. Those near endings, those cosmic close calls, are where our story goes next.